Picture this. It's Sunday afternoon. Millions of people are glued to their screens, hearts racing, palms sweating, screaming at referees who can't hear them. Their entire emotional state depends on whether strangers in uniforms can get a ball across a line. Meanwhile, you're reading a book, working on a project, hiking in nature, or just enjoying the quiet. And you genuinely don't understand what all the fuss is about. If that's you, you're not alone. Roughly 40% of people report little to no interest in sports. And according to recent psychological and neuroscientific research, your brain might be processing social connection, reward, and meaning in fundamentally different ways than the sports-obsessed majority. But here's what nobody tells you. This difference reveals something profound about human psychology, about how we find belonging, and about the incredibly diverse ways our brains seek fulfillment in this complex world. Let me be absolutely clear from the start. This isn't about proving one side is better than the other. It's not about validating your choices or attacking anyone else's. It's about understanding why such a massive divide exists in how people experience something that seems so simple on the surface. Watching other people compete in games. The goal here is genuine understanding, not superiority. Because once you understand the psychology, you'll see that both sports fans and non-fans are solving the same fundamental human problems, just through radically different strategies. Let's start with what happens in the brain of someone who lives and breathes sports. When a devoted fan watches their team, something remarkable occurs at the neurological level. Their brain releases oxytocin, the same powerful neurochemical involved in mother-infant bonding, romantic attachment, and deep friendship. Think about that for a moment. The same chemical that makes you feel connected to your closest loved ones, to your children, to your partner, is flooding their system while watching complete strangers throw a ball around a field. This isn't metaphorical. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's extensive research on emotional processing suggests that our brains don't always distinguish between direct and vicarious experiences. When a sports fan watches their team, mirror neurons fire throughout their motor cortex as if they're actually participating in the action. Their nervous system responds to a touchdown or goal almost as if they personally scored it themselves. Functional MRI studies conducted at multiple universities show that watching your team activates the ventral striatum, nucleus accumbens, and other reward centers, the exact same regions that light up during eating delicious food, having sex, and experiencing other primary pleasures. But it goes even deeper than simple pleasure response. The unpredictability of sports creates what behavioral psychologists call a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, which is scientifically proven to be the most powerful and addictive pattern of reward known to psychology. This is the same mechanism that makes slot machines and gambling so devastatingly addictive. Every single play is a mini lottery. Will they score? Will they fail? Will something unexpected happen? Your brain releases dopamine not just when good things happen, but in anticipation of them potentially happening. This uncertainty creates a powerful neurochemical hook that keeps people coming back game after game, season after season. For people who don't care about sports, this entire mechanism simply doesn't engage. The same unpredictable competition that creates euphoria, anxiety, and obsession in sports fans creates absolutely nothing for non-fans. It's not that they're consciously suppressing excitement or deliberately refusing to engage. The neurological response just fundamentally isn't there. Their dopamine systems are wired to respond to different stimuli entirely. Perhaps it's the satisfaction of solving a complex problem, the beauty of a musical performance, the insight from a philosophical conversation, or the accomplishment of creating something with their own hands. Humans evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in small groups where belonging meant survival. For 99% of our species' history, being cast out from your tribe was essentially a death sentence. You'd lose access to shared resources, protection from predators, collaborative hunting, and the collective knowledge that kept people alive. Your brain still carries this ancient programming deep in its evolutionary architecture. The fear of social exclusion, the desire to belong, the comfort of being part of something larger than yourself, these aren't just cultural preferences. They're hardwired survival instincts that shaped human evolution. Sports teams tap directly into this tribal circuitry with remarkable efficiency. The jerseys, the colours, the chants, the rivalries, they're all modern versions of war paint, clan symbols, and territorial displays. When someone says we won, they're not being grammatically confused. They're experiencing something psychologically real, a sense of collective identity that transcends their individual self. Psychologist Henri Teifel's groundbreaking social identity theory explains this perfectly. People derive a significant part of their self-concept from the groups they belong to. For sports fans, their team becomes a major component of their identity. When the team succeeds, they feel personally elevated. When the team fails, they experience genuine emotional pain that can affect their mood for days. But here's what's fascinating about non-sports people. They often show significantly lower levels of what researchers call social identity complexity and group-based self-definition. They're less likely to define themselves through group memberships and collective identities. Their sense of self is more internalized, more individualistic, more based on personal characteristics than group affiliations. A comprehensive study published in the Journal of Sport Behavior found that individuals with low sports interests scored significantly lower on collectivism scales across multiple measures. They're more likely to think of themselves as autonomous individuals rather than as members of larger collectives. This doesn't mean they lack social connection or don't value relationships. They absolutely do. They're just getting those needs met differently, through one-on-one friendships, smaller communities, shared activities where they're active participants rather than passive spectators, and through intellectual or creative collaborations. Here's something genuinely counterintuitive that surprises most people. Sports fans often score higher on certain standardized measures of empathy. They've practiced caring intensely about the struggles and triumphs of people they've never met and never will meet. They feel genuine distress when their team loses, authentic joy when they win, real concern when a player gets injured. So if sports fans have this empathy capacity, why don't non-sports people feel that same empathy for athletes? Why doesn't watching someone work incredibly hard to achieve their dreams move them the way it moves fans? The answer lies in what psychologists call empathy allocation, or compassion distribution. Everyone, regardless of their personality type, has a finite capacity for deep emotional investment. Human beings cannot care intensely about everything. We have to choose, consciously or unconsciously, where to direct our limited emotional resources. It's not that non-sports people lack empathy or emotional depth. They're directing those powerful feelings elsewhere, toward different targets that resonate more deeply with their values and interests. Research from UCLA's Social Cognitive Neuroscience Lab suggests that empathy is partly a choice about where to focus limited emotional resources. Non-sports individuals often channel their empathy toward different targets: social justice causes, environmental issues, personal relationships, creative collaborations, intellectual pursuits, animal welfare, or community service. A significant 2020 study published in Personality and Individual Differences found that people with low sports interests scored significantly higher in trait openness to experience and aesthetic sensitivity. They're experiencing similar emotional depths and seeking similar transcendent experiences, but through art museums instead of stadiums, through novels instead of games, through meaningful conversations instead of sports commentary, through nature instead of competition. Their brains are fundamentally seeking the same things: meaning, transcendence, emotional catharsis, deep connection, moments of being fully alive. They're just finding those experiences in entirely different places. One of the most profound psychological differences between sports fans and non-fans lies in how they construct meaning and find narrative significance in their lives. Sports fans find deep meaning in athletic narratives. The underdog story where a team everyone counted out defies expectations. The redemption arc where a fallen athlete claws back to glory. The dynasty's rise and inevitable fall. The bitter rivalry that spans generations. These narratives have genuine emotional stakes precisely because the outcomes are real, unscripted and unpredictable. When a team that hasn't won a championship in decades finally claims victory, it becomes a story of perseverance, hope, and collective faith that resonates with deep human themes. When a legendary player retires, it's a meditation on mortality, legacy, and the passage of time. Sports provide ready-made mythology, epic tales unfolding in real time with real consequences. People who don't care about sports often find this randomness fundamentally unsatisfying. They think, why would I emotionally invest in an outcome I can't influence, performed by people I don't know and who don't know me, in a contest that doesn't affect my actual life in any material way? It's a completely logical position, but it misses something that sports fans understand intuitively. The lack of control is precisely what makes it meaningful. It's real drama with real consequences, not scripted entertainment. The uncertainty is the point. Nobody knows how the story ends until it actually happens. Non-sports people often prefer narratives they can participate in, or at least ones where the meaning feels more direct and personal. A great novel allows them to explore human psychology and moral complexity. A creative project gives them agency and the satisfaction of building something. A scientific breakthrough advances actual human knowledge. A deep relationship involves genuine reciprocity, where both people matter to each other. Neither approach to meaning-making is superior or more valid. They're simply different psychological strategies for satisfying the same fundamental human hunger for story, purpose, and emotional significance. Psychologist Julian Rotter's influential concept of locus of control is incredibly illuminating when examining sports interest. People with an internal locus of control believe they primarily shape their own outcomes through their choices and efforts. Those with an external locus of control believe outcomes are largely determined by outside forces like luck, fate, or other people's actions. Interestingly, people who don't obsess over sports tend to show stronger internal locus of control across multiple psychological measures. They prefer investing their limited time and emotional energy in areas where they can directly influence results. Watching sports means surrendering to complete uncertainty, accepting that the outcome is entirely beyond your control, and for some personality types, that's deeply uncomfortable rather than thrilling. This connects directly to research on tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty. Sports fans tend to score significantly higher on this personality trait. They're more comfortable with unresolved tension, with outcomes beyond their control, with the anxiety of not knowing how things will turn out. Non-sports individuals often prefer situations where effort more directly and predictably correlates with results. This psychological preference might explain why many non-sports people are drawn to pursuits like learning musical instruments, developing craft skills, writing, coding, or athletics they personally practice, where improvement comes from deliberate, sustained effort rather than the fortune of which team you happen to choose. Sports fandom relies heavily on what media psychologists call parasocial relationships, which are one-sided emotional connections where you feel deeply about someone who doesn't know you exist and never will. You care intensely about the athlete's performance, their career trajectory, their personal struggles, their legacy. But they're completely unaware of your existence. For sports fans, these relationships feel genuine, meaningful, and rewarding despite their one-sided nature. They follow players' careers across years or even decades, celebrating their successes as if they were personal friends, mourning their failures, defending them in arguments, feeling betrayed if they switch teams. Non-sports individuals often find parasocial investment fundamentally unsatisfying. They prefer relationships with actual reciprocity, where their emotional energy is recognized and returned, where both parties are aware of each other and mutually influence each other's lives. This isn't about one type of relationship being more real or valid than the other. Parasocial relationships serve genuine psychological functions. They provide role models, entertainment, emotional experiences, and a sense of connection without the complications, demands, and vulnerabilities of actual reciprocal relationships. But different personalities have radically different needs when it comes to connection. Some people find deep satisfaction in these one-way attachments. Others feel like they're investing emotional currency and getting nothing back, like shouting into a void. Sports psychology has documented two fascinating behavioral patterns with somewhat awkward acronyms: BIRG, basking in reflected glory, and CORF, cutting off reflected failure. When their team wins, fans consistently say, "We won." When the team loses, they suddenly switch and say, "They lost." Notice the pronoun shift? Fans psychologically merge their identity with success and create distance from failure. It's an unconscious self-esteem protection mechanism. People who don't obsess over sports show dramatically less of this behavior across all measures. Their self-esteem tends to be more stable, less volatile, less dependent on external events they can't control. They don't need borrowed victories to feel successful or worthy. Research by social psychologist Robert Cialdini, who first documented and named the BIRG phenomenon, found that this behavior serves a self-esteem maintenance function. Fascinatingly, after experiencing personal failures or setbacks, people are even more likely to bask in their team's glory, to psychologically compensate for their own disappointments. For non-sports individuals, self-esteem is more anchored in personal achievements, relationship quality, internal values, or creative accomplishments. It's not that their self-esteem is necessarily higher or lower on average, just that it's calibrated to entirely different sources and tends to fluctuate less dramatically. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's decades of research on flow, those magical states of complete absorption where time disappears and you're fully present, reveals that these optimal experiences can be achieved through countless different activities. Sports fans often achieve genuine flow states through watching important games. They're completely present, intensely focused, totally absorbed in the unfolding drama. For those hours, everyday worries completely disappear. Past and future fade away. It's actually a form of active meditation, a way of being fully in the moment. Non-sports people achieve functionally identical psychological states through entirely different activities, losing themselves completely in a compelling book, becoming absorbed in creative work where hours pass unnoticed, experiencing flow through hiking in nature, cooking an elaborate meal, solving complex problems, or deep conversation. The crucial insight here is that both groups are seeking the exact same psychological state, that precious sense of being fully alive, fully engaged, and completely present. They've just discovered different portals to that universal human experience. For some people, not caring about sports isn't purely about brain chemistry, personality traits, or philosophical preferences. It's sometimes a psychological response to negative experiences that created lasting associations. Maybe they were consistently picked last in gym class and internalized the message that they weren't athletic enough to matter. Maybe they felt alienated by aggressive, hyper-masculine sports culture that didn't match their personality. Maybe they associated sports with bullying, exclusion, or social humiliation during formative years. For these individuals, indifference to sports can genuinely be a protective psychological stance. I don't care about that world because that world made clear it didn't care about me, so I'll invest my energy elsewhere where I'm welcome. This doesn't invalidate their position or make it less authentic. Defense mechanisms aren't inherently unhealthy. They're adaptive ways we protect ourselves from environments that felt hostile, unwelcoming, or psychologically unsafe. Understanding this adds important nuance to the conversation. Sometimes, I don't care about sports really means I learned through painful experience that caring about sports was emotionally dangerous for me, so I built walls. Recent research in behavioral genetics suggests that interest in competitive spectating may have actual genetic components, not just cultural or environmental ones. Studies examining dopamine receptor gene variants, particularly the DRD4 gene, show correlations with novelty-seeking behavior and reward sensitivity. Some people's dopamine systems are naturally more responsive to vicarious competition and uncertainty. Others' neurochemical systems respond more powerfully to direct participation, creative expression, intellectual discovery, or aesthetic experience. This doesn't mean your sports interest level is completely predetermined by your DNA. Environmental factors, life experiences, and personal choices obviously matter enormously. But it does suggest that biological factors influence our baseline tendencies and what our brains find naturally rewarding. Your complete indifference to whether a particular team wins or loses might partly reflect your fundamental neurochemistry, not just your conscious choices or life experiences. Here's a perspective that resonates powerfully with many non-sports people: the fundamental question of where to invest limited time and attention in a finite life. The average dedicated NFL fan spends roughly 3 hours per game, often watching multiple games per week during the season, plus highlights, analysis shows, fantasy league management, and sports talk radio or podcasts. Add in playoffs and other sports, and over a lifetime, that's literally thousands of hours experiencing other people's struggles and triumphs, rather than pursuing your own. Non-sports individuals often feel intuitively that their time is better spent in their own arena, pursuing their own goals, building their own skills, creating their own achievements, living their own stories rather than spending massive amounts of time watching others live theirs. There's genuine philosophical weight to this perspective. Psychologically, being an active protagonist in your own narrative, rather than a passive spectator in others, can create a fundamentally different sense of agency, purpose, and fulfillment. But sports fans would counter, quite reasonably, that watching great athletes is like appreciating any other art form. You wouldn't tell someone they're wasting time reading Shakespeare because they didn't write the plays themselves. You wouldn't say listening to Beethoven is pointless because you didn't compose the symphony. Both perspectives contain real validity and depend on deeper values about participation versus appreciation. The divide between sports fans and non-fans ultimately reveals something beautiful about human psychological diversity. We're not all wired to find meaning, joy, and connection in the same places. You're not broken, you're not boring, you're not missing out on some essential human experience. You're engaging with the same fundamental needs through different channels that match your unique psychology. Understanding these differences doesn't just explain sports fandom, it illuminates how beautifully varied human psychology really is.